Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello.
So it's Saturday at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. I am Chris Weave, as it says there, and this is not Pat Doyle. Hello, Alec. Good to see you.
Yeah, man, it's good to see you too. As the first time we've been with Kitten here.
Yes.
We are now cat owners.
So that is fantastic. I need. It's been so I lost Buddy in December, and at some point, once my health has stabilized a little bit more, my intention is I'm going to try to get two this time, so that they have cats to play with each other. So it's always good. I want to get a couple of litter mates, but I'm not quite at that point yet. But I am at the point where I'm not speaking for my employer, just to make sure, because I re-listened to the last show we did, which was 2 weeks ago, and I forgot that I was so out of practice. I forgot to say that until like halfway through the show. So I'm thinking about just getting it tattooed on my forehead because it'll make things easier.
Oh,
so.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, or we should just put a scroll at the bottom of the screen.
We've got one, and at this point, Lissa would have usually thrown it up, and sometimes we use it, sometimes we don't. It's in there somewhere. At some point, I want to go in and sort of move a few things around so it's easier to find the stuff for the different shows, but we just haven't gotten around to doing that.
We probably need to clean it up too. There's probably a lot of refuse in there.
Yeah, I've been thinking about something to do as soon as I'm got a little bit more energy, but I am feeling pretty much better than I was before. Pat is being a slacker, and by that I mean he has to get up at 3:45 in the morning to go off to his day job. He's doing simulator stuff, and the thing about those simulators for his airline is they don't quite run them 24 hours a day, because you do have to do maintenance and stuff on them, but they come about as close to running them as 24 hours a day as you can get.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they're really expensive, and you'd much rather run it 24 hours a day than to have to buy two and to have the facilities for two. So and he's on a rotating schedule. So sometimes he goes in at 11 o'clock at night, 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and is there for 6 or 8 hours. And sometimes he goes in at like 5 o'clock in the morning and is there for 6 or 8 hours and stuff like that. And then every now and then he still has to get in an airplane and fly, because even if you're a training pilot and you're running the simulator, you still have to get stick time to maintain your quals. So he still has to fly once a month. So that's where he is today. And Lissa, for everybody else, Lissa only got a few hours. Let me adjust my camera a little bit. Turn my laptop just a little bit. Lissa only got about 4 hours of sleep last night, so she was busy. So she's trying to get caught up on shut eye. And since Alec is here, Alec volunteered to jump in. Thank you very much. And I figured what we would do is we'd have sort of talk about a few things that I've kind of got in the works, and maybe a few previews of some things that I want to do on the show. And Alec, if you want to talk about stuff you saw at Dragon Con, that'd be great. And then we can also answer questions. So
okay. So the first thing I've got to ask, because you and I have not talked in a couple months, really.
Yeah. Except for an email here and there.
Yeah. What did you think of Top Gun?
You're not going to believe this.
You hated it.
No, I still haven't seen it.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Come on.
I haven't been in a movie theater since before COVID. I tried to go see Dune in the movie theater. So, I went out to Las Vegas. There's a DOD facility out in Las Vegas. I won't mention which service has a large air base there because I don't speak for my employer. But I was out there on 2 different occasions for 2 weeks each. And I was supposed to go out a third time at the end of July, and that ended up getting canceled because of all the medical stuff that was going on before the emergency. But during the first trip when I went out there, I had this really bad acid reflux cough. And, I wouldn't have gone to the movie theater normally if I was going to be coughing like once a minute, let alone during COVID. And so despite the fact that there was have you spent much time in Vegas? Like, have you been
Oh yeah.
Like at a resort
Not at a resort. At the hotels.
or like a casino?
Oh yeah.
Because like the thing that just I didn't understand until somebody explained it to me is that like casinos have sort of turned into the shopping malls of the 21st century, in that you go to a casino and it'll have restaurants, it'll have fast food type restaurants, it'll have sit down restaurants, and it'll have like bars and movie theaters. So I could go to the movie theater just by walking to the other end of the casino. And I thought about it and I thought about it. And the thing is, I was like buying Ricolas come in 100-item bags. I was buying, and they come in 2 packs. So you can buy 200 Ricolas at a time. And I was buying one of those like every 2 weeks. I was going through cough so much. And I ended up not seeing Dune in the theater. And I thought, well, maybe later when I come back, it'll still be there. And it wasn't. I just missed it. So I still haven't seen Dune in the theater, but my plan for Dune is I figured they're gonna have to put it back in the theater when
part 2 comes out.
When part 2 comes out.
Yeah.
So I got a plan for that. I just need to, at some point, I need to rent Maverick.
Oh my God. Yeah. Because I don't know anyone who doesn't love that movie. I mean, and it runs the gamut from critics to people who love the original to people who didn't like the original. I've yet to hear the person say, "Oh my God, I hated that movie."
The only thing that, I mean, putting on my professional hat for a moment, Tom Cruise. The only way that Tom Cruise could still be in the Navy after this amount of time and only be an 06, a captain, that would, because it's an upper out system. So by this point, it would have required like literally an act of Congress to make a by name exception for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I haven't sat down and done the math, but I'm pretty sure, because like 1986, that was pretty damn close to 40 years ago. And he was already a lieutenant, right? He was already in 03.
Yeah.
So, and he had been through flight training, et cetera, et cetera. So he probably, by that point, he had at least 5 years in, which means he's hit his 40-year mark.
Right. Yeah. And
so you're limited to 40 years, and that only applies if you can continue to get promoted.
Says something to that effect. I forgot the exact line, but he says, you've been busted 3 times or whatever. You should be an admiral by now or something like that. And
he would legally have to be an admiral by now in order for that to work. I mean, literally, because it's an upper out system. And if you're passed over for promotion and,
interesting.
There might be something weird in there that if you get busted and then you get promoted, it counts as being promoted. I don't know. That's something that maybe Scott Voigt or somebody else who's, my knowledge of how the Navy works is, in some places it's quite deep, but it's also sort of idiosyncratic, because if it's something that I've researched or something that I've encountered, I might actually know a fair amount about it. But if it's something that's like something weird and it's not like the sort of thing that I would run into as an analyst, I just may not have a very good understanding of exactly how that works. So there's lots of, I know more about how to fight the ship than I know about how to manage your career in the Navy. Because I was paying attention to the ship fighting stuff, but the career in the Navy stuff. So Mike Forrest says that I'm speaking truth. Hopefully Mike is qualified to say that I'm speaking truth. So I'll just assume that he is. But this is, I could go and ask somebody. I mean, I've got friends that are Navy captains. I've got friends that are Navy captains, one of whom I want to have come on the show at some point. I've talked with him about it because he's written a science fiction book called A Sword into Darkness that's really, really very good. Mike says that he's a vet. He says that he's a vet. So he's been in, and so he left at 24 years. So, But I want to the guy's name is Tom Mays. He's about to take command of a ship that's currently in the shipyard being constructed. But I'm hoping to have him on the show at some point and talk with him about his science fiction book, A Sword into Darkness. And hopefully he'll be able to, soon he will retire and he'll be able to finish the sequel.
All right. Donnie asked me if I was going to buy Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the director's edition. Probably. I'm sure at some point I may buy it. I'm not that big a fan of the motion picture. I'm just not. And I think it's good. And the director's cut certainly made it much better. It's one of those things like, why even why don't watch the original anymore? Just watch the director's cut. And doing it in 4K or whatever they did it in, great. Kudos to that group of guys who restored it. But it's still a great episode, and that's it. It's not a great Star Trek movie, despite what a small group of very vocal fans say. Who are all basically retconning what everyone said for the past 40 years or 30. When did it come? Whatever, 40 years. Which is basically like, it wasn't a good, you're bringing Star Trek back and that was it. Shitty costumes and you're redoing the Changeling. That was your idea.
It's a great episode. That's 2 hours long.
It's a great episode that's 2 hours long.
Hour too much.
Retells a story that they already told. What the Nomad story? It already told that story. So, and the long, loving run around the Enterprise and all. Director's cut is definitely better, and I appreciate it.
The really interesting thing about my reaction to that movie is I have a different reaction every time I see it. When I first saw it, I thought, okay, it's Star Trek, so go ahead and
yes, right.
Jam the needle
There's
in.
no such thing as bad Star Trek.
The next time I saw it, it's like, I hate this movie.
Oh, that's interesting.
Then the next time I saw it was on the big screen at the Smithsonian when they did the Smithsonian movie. So when they had the Star Trek Smithsonian exhibit thing. And the thing is, it's like, what is the recurring theme about people that aren't Star Trek people who do a Star Trek event? The recurring theme is 8 times as many people show up as they expected because they just can't believe that it would be this popular. So when they had Star Trek: The Motion Picture on the IMAX screen at the Air and Space Museum, I got there relatively early. I was like number 6 in line because I figured this is going to be a much bigger deal than they think it is. So I literally got there like 3 hours early. And and I wasn't the first person in line. This was an after hours thing. So I got there at like close of business, and I think they kicked off at like 6 or 7. And they had a line going out the door. And so they finally ended up, the next time they had to give out tickets. You didn't have to pay for it. It was free, but they had to give out tickets because they had people who waited in line and were then told, like, sorry, the theater's full. There's no room. And I think they ended up, like the other ones, they ended up doing like twice each. But I watched it that time and it's like, this is a lot better movie than I remembered it being. And then since I've seen it one other time since then, it's like the pacing is just glacial. And I mean, it's almost Kubrickian in how slow it is.
Yeah.
So Stanley Kubrick is, I mean, I'm kind of a science fiction heretic in that I'm not a real big fan of 2001, right? The ship designs are great. I love the technology. I love the ethos of it. But the movie itself is just kind of plods. And Kubrick is great for atmosphere. He's great for, the cinematography and how things work. I remember the scene from, speaking of Tom Cruise, I remember the scene from Eyes Wide Shut where he's walking through the masquerade party and they're walking through the mansion, and that scene where the naked lady's just leading him through the house is just fantastic. But the movie itself is just like, come on.
Yeah.
And I think the motion picture is that way too.
Yeah, of course it is. It's just everything takes forever to happen, and we don't have enough of the interaction of the crew. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, right? We just don't get enough of that. We get that one great scene in Kirk's quarters, but and listen, so it's listen, if you poll Star Trek fans, take 10,000 Star Trek fans, what percentage of them are going to say Star Trek the Motion Picture is the best Star Trek movie? 1%? It's certainly less than 5%, no matter what you tell me.
I think you're right.
And I think 90% of them are going to tell you it's Star Trek 2,
and I am not
4,
one of those people.
And then it's probably Star Trek 4.
I am one of those people.
Yeah, 2 or 4. You either love Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, or you love Save the Whales. They're both, clearly the class of the early Star Trek. And some people say First Contact, and First Contact is a fantastic Star Trek movie, right? It's the pinnacle of next generation Star Trek filmmaking. But all 3 of those movies are better than Star Trek the Motion Picture, and you can't. I just feel like any argument against that is just like you just got something stuck up your butt about Star Trek the Motion Picture. And
have I ever told you my rule for watching Star Trek movies?
Oh, what's that?
If I have an opportunity to watch a Star Trek movie, I ask myself, would I rather watch this Star Trek movie or would I rather watch yesterday's Enterprise twice?
Yeah,
and I mean, there has literally been times where like I've turned off the cable part and I've loaded yesterday's Enterprise and sat through and watched it twice, because I think yesterday's Enterprise is the single best thing that the franchise ever did.
I'm not sure I agree with you, because you're even more extreme than me, because it is my favorite Next Generation episode, with the only fatal flaw being the costumes of the Enterprise C. That was such a last second haphazard for Robert Fletcher to do that, which is shocking to me. Considering how good he is at everything else. Not Fletcher, Robert Blackman. I was shocked by what a bad choice that was. That being said, other than that, it is the perfect episode.
And I think Berman is on one of those guys is on record as saying, if we had realized that they were going to let us do next gen movies, we never would have wasted that script on an episode.
Right?
They would have just pocketed the script and waited for it.
Oh my God. Yeah. No,
now it's the only, I think it's the only next gen episode that has a making of book about it.
Yesterday's Enterprise does?
The script writer did a book called The Making of Yesterday's Enterprise. Now, I think that if I remember correctly, they had 2 scripts that were sort of kind of similar to each other and had similar themes. And they said, hey, let's do that Reese's peanut butter cup thing where they take the peanut butter and the chocolate and mix them together. And so I think they ended up getting co-screenwriter credit.
Oh, Eric Stillwell. Yeah. I know Eric.
Yeah, and he also he's got a Facebook page called Yesterday's Enterprise where, I mean, he's really, he's getting what he can out of that episode. But you know what? It's a fantastic episode.
Don't blame him. Yeah, it is a fantastic episode. Yeah,
I mean, especially the thing that always kills me is the episode where Yar goes into Picard's office to request transfer.
Yeah, I mean, that is a brilliant scene. That is a brilliant scene, and the scene between Whoopi and Picard,
yes,
is just fucking brilliant. Those are 2 of the best scenes in all of Next Generation, and they both happen in the same episode.
Yeah, and I mean that the Yar scene has a particular resonance for me, because. So, let me preface this by saying, there's a lot of people that put on the uniform and go out and do dangerous stuff every day. and I would occasionally drop by and visit them and do stuff, right? So I am by no means trying to equate what I did when I worked at the Center for Naval Analysis with what these folks are doing day in and day out. But I did fly on the carrier onboard delivery aircraft, right? Landing on an aircraft carrier is dangerous. Being on an aircraft carrier on the flight deck is dangerous. I've been on the flight deck probably a dozen times while they've been doing flight ops, of which 4 of those times I was getting onto the airplane to fly off, and 4 of those times I flew onto the ship. And the very first time I remember, I was aboard John C. Stennis getting ready to fly back to San Diego, and I'm in the carrier onboard delivery aircraft, and we're moving around on the deck. And I remember thinking that if we go over the side, if the pilot screws up, we're probably 10 feet from the edge of the deck, and we're 100 feet above the water, 80 to 100 feet above the water. And if the plane goes over the side, that's it. That's it. Not everybody's making it out.
Yeah.
And I seriously thought long and hard about what I would do in that situation. And maybe we can talk about that. But I then sort of made the decision. I made a couple of decisions, of which one of them was that I was never going to get on that airplane again if I wasn't okay with the idea that I was going to die on that airplane. Right. And I don't want to make it sound like they drop out of the sky, because that's not the case, but it's certainly more dangerous than crossing the street when I walk to the grocery store. And accidents happen, and it's a dangerous situation. And I decided that I was okay with my tombstone reading, was killed on the cod supporting an exercise. And that as long as I was okay with that, I would continue to do the job. And for the record, I'm still okay with that. If my health allowed me to, and they called me back and said, "We want you to go to sea," I'd be there right away, because it was a fantastic experience. But so when Yar goes in and says, "I recognize that there was a possibility of dying in this uniform, but I want it to mean something if it happens," I totally get that.
Yeah, I certainly could understand that. Of course, whenever you talk about your carrier, what do you call it? The onboard delivery system?
Yeah, the COD, carrier onboard delivery. It's like a U-Haul with wings.
All I keep thinking of is the scene in Hunt for Red October.
Yeah,
that's that scene, because you're not the only person I know who's flown on one of those things, and everyone says it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is you don't have a window. There's only 2 windows in there, so you face backwards, and it's like being in the back of a U-Haul, except you've got this airline type seat, although it's got a lot more metal than your normal airline seat has, and it's got a 4-point harness. So that's another thing that differentiates it. And then above you, there's like a cargo net with some rescue gear and stuff in there. And it's not particularly well lit, and there's only 2 little windows that are at the very end, and you don't get to sit there. You have to either be a VIP or part of the flight crew to sit back there. And so there was a funny story that happened one time on one of these exercises. It was my last time at sea on an aircraft carrier. I was aboard. So this was April of 2004. Spent my birthday at sea for the 2nd year in a row, which was cool. And we were aboard John C. Stennis again. And we did 2 exercises back to back with the weekend in the way. So we did an exercise that was like Wednesday to Friday, and then we started again on Monday with the next exercise that was going to be like a 10-day exercise. And the CNA lead who was there decided that he was going to, he actually lived in San Diego, and he was going to go ashore. And okay, I'm okay with this. I'm totally okay with this. But one of my other CNA colleagues was just pissed because it's like, my wife and kid are in Maryland, and he's going to go home and see his wife and kid, and he just wasn't buying into Kevin's excuse that he had this meeting that was really important on Monday, and he was going to catch the meeting on Monday, and then he was going to fly back out to the ship. And so Kevin goes ashore, and when Kevin gets back, he's a bundle of nerves when he comes back in on Monday, because they had a problem on the Cod. So they're flying out to the ship, and at some point, apparently the radio went off, the intercom system went off for the crew that's in the back, and he's like talking to him on there. Okay, and the one guy gets a manual and starts flipping through the manual looking for something. The other guy walks up the ramp, and he's like putting his hand up and then looking at his hand, doing this, and the other guy's flipping through the book, and he's not finding what he's looking for, right? And they're kind of looking at each other going like, and of course, you're on the world's most dangerous airplane. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but right, it's dangerous. Flying is one of those things that if you're not sure what's going on, does your imagination tell you it's probably nothing? Or does your imagination say, we're going to fall out of the sky? I'm going to die. So Kevin, he tells us this part where one of the guys who was one of the officers who was actually a pilot unbuckles, goes up to the cockpit, comes back 30 seconds later, gets back in his chair, buckles up, and goes to sleep. You would think that would put you at ease. Kevin's totally focused on the guy flipping through the manual, the other guy, and whatever. And they had said at some point, we're going to have to circle and burn off fuel. So what was normally a half-hour trip was going to be like a 4-hour trip.
Oh, God.
Because they had to burn off fuel. Now, here's what was really going on. What's really going on is you load with not necessarily a full fuel load, but you load, on something like that, you'd have at least enough fuel that you could make a couple of attempts. And if you had a problem, you could make it back to shore, right? So you go with a big fuel load. You don't ever want to actually land with more fuel than you need because, fire, right? If you have a crash, then the less fuel, the less likelihood that you're going to have a fire. Right. And so standard operating procedure is to dump fuel. Now, I'll point out for the record, just like every other airplane known to man, every airplane will dump fuel on occasion. They've all got the little pipe to dump the fuel. And so this isn't that special. But my hypothesis is they had a bunch of reporters on board, and I think they didn't want to say, yeah, we routinely dump fuel on the Dolphins and stuff like that. They just didn't want to say it. So they didn't say why they were circling. And so Kevin is like this. And so Kevin then leaves the room, and we're just sort of going, yeah, right there with you, brother, right there with you. Kevin leaves the room, and the guy who was pissed that Kevin had left just bursts out laughing. He thinks this is the funniest thing he's ever heard, was that Kevin went ashore to go see his wife and kid, and as a result had this like nightmare return journey. So that was the most dramatic thing I ever had on the Cod. I will say though that my first carrier landing took a week after my first carrier landing. I went to Las Vegas for the first time, and I saw Star Trek: The Experience. And I don't know if you ever saw it, but it had this pneumatic ride where you're being chased by Klingons through the skyline. And so we're doing this, and it's going like this, etc. And I remember thinking, this is just like landing on an aircraft carrier, except it's longer with better visuals.
Oh, it was, I know. It's kind of like it was, it's a shake and bake.
Yeah, and
it's like Star Tours.
And you could end up with some of that landing on an aircraft carrier. The second time I landed on a carrier, I think was the time where we were clearly not quite in the groove, because at one point we dropped, I don't know how far, but we dropped. And then then we came out of it. And so we had G's pushing us into our seat, and that was totally atypical. But because I remember going like, whoa, that's kind of interesting. We didn't do that the last time. But did you ever do the behind the scenes tour at Star Trek: The Experience?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did, and that was a lot. That was a lot of fun, of course. And then when they closed Star Trek: The Experience, which was around 2000 and we in 2010. No, I forget now. We basically CBS hired me to auction off all the stuff from. They basically closed it down and thrown everything in a warehouse. Everything in a warehouse. The seats from the rides, which were pretty cool. They couldn't get out remember the big ships that were above your head when you walked in? They couldn't get them out easily. So like they literally cut the nacelles off the Enterprise and blah, blah, blah. So we sold everything.
Cool.
We basically went into this warehouse. It was like it was a 2-part warehouse with a loading dock, a descending ramp. And we basically spent about 2 days clearing out all the shit, putting it outside for them to take care of, laying everything out. Adam Savage even came.
Oh, cool.
To buy stuff. All the old people who, all the old cast, the actors, they came to get their costumes and stuff. And we had we had some national press for it. And yeah, we had a line outside when we were opening up in the morning. It was a lot of fun. It was a freaking lot of fun. So one more thing I did for CBS right before they, sued us.
Were you part of the big TNG auction?
No, I was not. That was before. That was how I got into that was 2006. That was Mike and Denise Okuda were the ones who were called in to archive everything and help produce everything. And then so that was it. And then after that, they stupidly hired this used clothing store in Burbank called It's a Wrap to auction everything else off. And that was 2 years of hell because they were idiots.
Did you ever see the documentary about that auction?
Oh yeah, sure. I've got on because that documentary, which was on the History Channel, was also part of a special edition of the catalogs, a hardcover edition of the catalogs you could buy. You got that the History Channel special. So I think I'm in the History Channel special. I know I'm in the History Channel special because people, there's a couple different things. I'm in that. I'm also on an episode of Auction Kings, which is a show about an auction house here in Atlanta. And that's from 2011. And the funny thing was, Crystal and I are down at Dragon Con, and I'm just flipping the channel. We're just about to leave, and so I'm just flipping the channel on the TV, waiting for her to get ready. And Auction Kings is on. So I turn on Auction. So I'm like, let's watch Auction Kings. And it was my episode. 200 episodes they did, and I land on my episode. So that was interesting. Because people will tell me. Matter of fact, I think Scott Voigt told me one day, he was like, "Hey, I saw you on Auction Kings." I get that from time to time. Once a year, someone's like, "I saw you on Auction Kings," and so.
I just remember about that documentary, the History Channel documentary. They did the little piece about the flute, because it was the one thing that I could just go in and potentially buy the flute. I wasn't going to be able to buy the hero ship because the hero ship went for what, $75,000, something like that.
Well, right? Which one? The Enterprise A went for $250,000 and the Enterprise D went for $500,000.
Yeah. So I'm that's a little bit above my credit card limit. But for things like for the flute, there was a lot of people that were just Star Trek fans that were going to the flute. And so they had all these things of like, oh yeah, I'm going to bid on the flute. Oh yeah, I'm going to bid on the flute. Oh yeah.
We all said that.
And then they went to Patrick Stewart, and he goes, "It's not even a real flute. It doesn't play. It's just a piece of wood."
Right. Yeah. I know. Yeah, exactly. Hold on one second.
But that's such a fantastic episode. If I'd been at that auction, I would have bid for the flute too.
Well, okay, so here's my story on the flute. A lot of us wanted the flute, and this was before props and costumes were a big deal. Really, this is one of the things that set a lot of us on our path of collecting Star Trek props and costumes. So we're like, oh yeah, the flute. Like, oh yeah, and I think I had put in a bid for like $2,000 or something. I'm pretty sure it opened at, I want to say it opened at $12,000 or $18,000. It opened. That means pre-bidding had taken it up to that level. And so we were all like, okay, we're out. Yeah, it was a crazy auction. That was 2006. So, you're talking 15, 16 years. How long ago is that? 16 years ago?
16.
So the market was very different then. And that flute went for $47,000. That was the hammer price. It recently sold for $250,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is, so that's an interesting area. Let me just see. Stephen Ross asked, after houses, are you going to be selling any of the props? Well, we don't really have that many props. We have some costumes. So that may happen. We may sell some of the I'm sure we'll sell some of the costumes. So that we just don't have that many props for it's just right, because it's not a prop. It's not that kind of show. It's a documentary. So there you go. Just reading through some of the comments here, see if we have any questions.
Okay, so here's a quick question. I've got a question for you. Dana's been hard at work over the course of the last couple of years, taking the static displays out and replacing those with flat panels, right?
Well, not really. No, because what we have in the bridge is you have monitors at eye level, the little square ones, which are all old school monitors because they're 4x3, right? Okay. And then up top you have TV screens. Those were all installed originally, and then the working consoles in front of you, are just loose. They're just plexi panels that are printed. And they're backup. What he's doing is taking the lights. We had fluorescent lights under the consoles. Those all got stripped out, and he's putting LEDs in. That's what he's working on right now. Okay. That's what he's working on, which is great because it reduces. It's not only better light, more consistent, but it reduces our power requirements significantly.
And it'll make that set a lot cooler.
Yeah. Yes.
Because even fluorescents get warm.
Yeah. Yes. So. Yeah. Exactly. So so that's kind of where we are, and he's working away on it. And Josh Irwin is going to be shooting an episode, an Avalon Universe episode this fall, which takes place. It's like the Avalon Universe version of the Axanar time period. If that makes sense.
Okay, that sounds cool. Pat and I still have this plan that at some point we're going to go down to Atlanta and try to do an episode. We want to do an episode on the bridge where we talk about the various bridge stations and, how command and control would work on a bridge like that. We want to do that, but something in my life always gets in the way of the scheduling in that. So,
well, listen, the other thing we want to do is, and I've been talking to JG about the idea, which you and I have talked about doing a trip to the National Air and Space Museum. 3 museums. We want to hit 3 museums to start. National Air and Space Museum, then Wright-Patterson U.S. Air Force Museum, and then down here in Macon for what's the name of the base down here? It's on the tip of my tongue. Warner Robins, which has probably the 3rd best air and space museum in the country.
So for what it's worth, right now, I am 5 minutes away from that museum here at Wright Pat. And that includes the fact that I have to change, like I have to put shoes on and find my car keys. Because I mean, it's literally that close. It would be a long walk, but I'm walking distance to that museum. I drive when I go to my job on base, when I go to my cubicle, I drive right by the museum, although it's on the other side of the fence line.
Wow.
So, in fact, it's, if you look at it from above, it's a standard 1920s, 1930s airbase setup. Triangular runways.
Right.
So one of the runways is still active. If they need it, they will temporarily make it active. One of the runways is now part of the main loop around that part of the base. So I drive on the old runway all the time. And the third runway is the parking lot for the museum.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I remember deciding that that's what they had done when I looked at it. I need to go back and take, there's been a lot of changes over the years and stuff like that, but that's the general setup. So it's a fantastic museum, and I'll drive to DC to do Air and Space too. So just let me know, give me as much warning as you can, and I will be there.
Yeah, we'll absolutely let you know. Because
there's one other thing that I'm famous for. Like, every trip I ever do starts off as, Chris is going to go to this place and see these people. And by the time I'm done, it's like 6 different stops and this and that and the other thing, because I can't let a trip be simple. I have to make it as complicated as possible by cramming as much stuff in. So with that in mind, I came up with an idea that I ran by Pat today, and he's planning on being part of this. So I'm in Dayton, Ohio. I'm about an hour away from Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus big science fiction convention in Columbus is a con called MarCon, which unfortunately died last year. And then about 30 seconds later, it was brought back to life. Clear, and it came back. So the nonprofit that owns the name had basically let this one other nonprofit run the con. They were so nonprofit that they went bankrupt, and they're done. And then somebody else came in and said, "How about we run the con? Will you let us do it?" And the people who own it said, "Sure, go ahead." And so, as near as I understand, it's the local Royal Manticoran Navy chapter that's basically taking it over. And so they got on the horn, maybe, I think, with the assistance of Joelle Presby, who Andy and Joelle is from Columbus, although she and her husband Andy live in Cleveland. And Joelle's a co-author of David Weber, and from what I understand, I think what happened is Joelle called up David and said these people could use a guest of honor. How'd you like to be their guest of honor? So David is going to be the guest of honor there next year.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Tomorrow, I'm driving to Columbus to do a site survey at the hotel to figure out whether I want to get the junior suite or I want to rent one of the VIP suites, so I can basically have my own little con suite.
Oh God!
Specifically, this is my conceptualization of this is that it could be a place where people from Bu9, David Weber's organization, some of whom live in the area, some of them are planning, it's like, hey, why don't you come to, David's going to be the guest of honor, Joelle's going to be there, Andy's going to be there, let's all get together. And the other thing is, let's have a Starfleet Tactical meetup.
There you go.
So
there you go.
For anybody who's potentially interested, don't buy plane tickets yet. Don't do anything that's non-refundable until I give you the go. But the plan is that I think I'm gonna go and see, and if I'm happy with the size of the rooms and the options I'm given, because it's like the cheaper of the 2 rooms is like $500 a night by the time you add everything up. And so, and I'd show up on Thursday and leave on Monday. It's Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend. So, I mean, and this is just me, if I decide I'm going to try this, and if I end up having $2,000 worth of fun, we might do it again next year. But I'm going to go and see about doing that. And if I decide that this is something that I think will be worth doing, then I'll let you all know. And Pat's already said that he's going to come in for this con. He's going to bring his friend Chandler, who's the co-developer of his game and who's got a pretty good Star Trek background himself. In fact, Chandler was in the Naval Reserve. He's retired now. And he can tell the story about how the time when during an exercise, he was given command of the ship during an exercise, and he ran it like he was playing Starfleet battles.
Very cool.
Yeah. He was
very cool.
He was hunting the submarine, but he was thinking about it in terms of Starfleet battle terms, and was able to sort of put it all together. It was very interesting the next day when the captain said, "You could have told me you were a reservist." And he said, "I'm wearing the same pin you are, sir." You didn't ask.
By the way, we do need to show the best thing on the internet today.
What? Oh.
That's Harrison Ford and the kid who played Short Round in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, cool.
Reunited. This is all over Facebook right now. And it is truly a great photo. So I just had to share it. Matter of fact,
that is good.
Yeah, here's here I'll replace that with real quick, show you guys.
So Scott asked the question, did he win? In other words, did he get the submarine? And yes, he did. He did. I want to say it was a Chilean or Peruvian boat, and he did get the submarine. So
there you go, guys. There's the best thing on the internet today. I think the fact that so many people have posted that, really, it just tells you, how heartwarming and what a great little story that is. So,
yeah, the thing that I find, in some ways, that I find most interesting about Indiana Jones, the most interesting sort of little fact about Indiana Jones.
What's that?
Harrison Ford wasn't the first choice.
No, Tom Selleck was.
Tom Selleck was the first choice.
Yeah, and Tom couldn't get out of Magnum PI.
So
and now, you can't imagine it being anyone else but Harrison Ford.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that I think Tom Selleck is a better actor than people necessarily give him credit for, and because Magnum PI was a show of a type, and lots of fun, but nobody would ever come away from Magnum PI talking about the deep philosophical things that they talked about in that show, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the show was a lot of fun. But I don't know if you ever saw, he did an HBO movie called Ike: Decision at D-Day.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah, which is just, he plays Eisenhower, and he's fantastic in that role.
He is.
That when I was working on my master's degree at the Naval War College, one of the classes was showing clips out of that. And I finally said to the professor, I was doing the faculty by day, student by night thing, which is always interesting because which hat am I wearing? Am I a fellow faculty member, or am I a student? But I said to him, look, are you guys going to show us this entire movie backwards? Because that's what they were doing. They show us the third clip from the movie on the third week. And it's like, can we just watch the movie? And so a group of us, he said, yeah, we can do that next week. And so there was a group of us that stayed after class to watch the movie, and the movie's fantastic.
Oh, it's really well done. Yeah, it's really well done.
Yeah. And my favorite stat from that is, how many decisions did Eisenhower make about the D-Day landings on D-Day?
I don't know. Zero, right? Yeah. He was so well.
I guess he technically made the decision to not move off the beach, but it never got to the point where anybody said, "Sir, are we sticking around or are we going to leave?"
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me that we just didn't, the resistance that our troops met. It's like, really, the Navy couldn't have just pulverized the shit out of every one of those bunkers? I mean,
it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
So Scott Voigt asks a question. What did I think of Greyhound? Yet another movie I haven't seen yet. Now, I've seen all the combat clips, I think, and I need to see it. And I don't really have an excuse because it came out on Apple Plus. I don't have an excuse other than I don't want to get Apple Plus. If it were available on Amazon Prime, I would have watched it already. It has, okay, so there are theoretically some issues with it. It's the same kind of issues that you have on like Apollo 13 and a few other ones where, like, is it perfect? No. Like, it's the wrong class of ship for a destroyer in the Atlantic. Tom Hanks is a little bit old, and they didn't really come up with a good explanation as to why somebody that old was a destroyer CO and stuff like that. There's a few things in there that I just absolutely love, starting with the fact that at one point he gives an order, realizes it's the wrong order, immediately countermands it, and says, do the exact opposite. Because at one point he says like hard to starboard. I think if I remember correctly, he says hard to starboard, belay that, hard to port.
Oh, wow.
Because he's trying to judge the torpedo coming in. He's dodging a torpedo. And so he's trying to judge the dodging of the torpedo.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so, okay, there's a few instances where, maybe this guy should have said something instead of something else. If you go with Apollo 13, there's a few misplaced products. Lovell didn't watch the landing. None of those astronauts watched Apollo 11 from Lovell's living room. They were working. They were all in mission control. They were working. And, there was no fight on the, there was no argument on board the spacecraft, et cetera, et cetera. But, so I'm afraid that I can only give Apollo 13 a score of like 98.5 out of 100. And that's always my go-to movie when, Michael Bay, when he did Pearl Harbor, felt that he had to make Pearl Harbor more dramatic.
Right.
Ron Howard does a movie with no bad guys, one tiny explosion, everybody lives, everybody knows the outcome of the movie before the movie starts. And every time I watch that movie, I'm worried about the heat shield.
Yeah, I know.
Because the movie is just fantastic from beginning to end.
It is. It is a really fantastic movie. Yeah, absolutely. It is. So you're right. It just goes to show you don't need to make things over dramatic. Listen, Pearl Harbor, there's so much. There's some good stuff in there, but the love stories just weighs the whole thing down.
And the conspiracy and
then the whole thing. I mean, because I really like a lot of the way Michael Bay shoots things, but I would cut out a half of that movie.
Yeah.
And all the Doolittle Raid stuff is great. That's all great, but it's like you don't need. I don't know. I just felt like you didn't need. I didn't need so much about those two guys, about Josh Hartnett and Ben Affleck. I mean, and the whole thing at the airfield when they're trying to take off in their P-40s and what have you. I just that was all over dramatized, and I don't know. It just, that movie misses so hard. That it's a shame, but I keep saying, I feel like, that's because Bay was past his prime. Armageddon was the peak of Michael Bay, because once you get to Transformers, it's a totally different.
Armageddon's not exactly a movie without flaws. I mean,
but it's such a guilty pleasure. It's such a
it
good
is.
guilty
It is a
pleasure. It's
guilty
not a
pleasure.
good movie. It's not a great movie. It's just a fun movie. It's a
You know,
lot of things went right in that movie to make it fun, not to make it a
there's
great
another
movie.
movie I put in that category. I'll get to in a second. But the first thing I want to say is, was it Brad Pitt who was in Armageddon?
Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck. Okay, so Ben Affleck tells the story about how he went up to Michael Bay and said, "Why does it make more sense to train oil rig drillers to be astronauts than it does to train astronauts to be oil drillers?" And Ben Affleck says that Michael Bay's response was to say, "Shut the fuck up."
That's so Michael Bay. He's such an arrogant prick.
Yeah.
You know, Michael Bay is Jim Cameron without talent. You know, that's yeah.
Michael Bay strikes me as being, you know, never met the man. I most emphatically have not seen all of his movies and sort of done a critical appraisal of them. And I'm not a professional in this field. He strikes me as being somebody who would be better as a cinematographer than a director.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
yeah, because well, first of all, he can't get along with actors. You
Yeah.
know, as that. But I'll tell you, I think one of the things that Armageddon does right is it answers that question. It answers Ben Affleck's question. Why does it make more sense to make oil drillers astronauts than astronauts oil drillers? Because oil drilling is an art and being an astronaut is a science.
Could be. I need to go back and rewatch it. I mean, I haven't seen it.
I think it does a good job of that, because also, you know, and they also minimize they're not making them astronauts. They're putting them on a ship and making sure they don't die. That's different than being an astronaut. They don't have to learn the science. They don't have to learn how to run the ship. They don't have to. They are passengers. They are basically mission specialists.
And
right?
the other thing about situations like that is, you know, sometimes you don't have the alternative. You know, yeah, if they have an emergency and it's something that they don't know about, they're dead.
They're dead. That's you know.
Okay,
you're ripping out all the safeties, you know, of this operation and saying this is a binary. It failed. It's sees or fails, and
you see that in Battlestar Galactica. Like at one point when the Cylons are on board the ship, I want to say somebody says we've got 7 Marines left, and so basically it's like you grab a gun.
yeah.
They're just randomly, you know, Cookie, grab a gun. Put your ladle down. It's time to go fight Cylons.
Yeah, exactly. Someone also mentioned Deep Impact. Yeah, Deep Impact was a better movie. Of course, it was definitely a better movie. And I actually like watching both of them. You know,
I need to go back and watch them. You know, I was going to say something about guilty pleasures. I've got 2. One of them is John Varley's Millennium.
Oh God, yes. I read that book and I love that movie.
The book is fantastic. So what I tell people about the movie is not a good movie. You should watch the movie.
Yes.
Because the movie, objectively, I mean, Varley tells people it's not a good movie, right? He was the screenwriter for it. It's not just that he sold it. He actually wrote the script. He wrote 6 different. He wrote 6 different scripts for that movie because they kept switching directors. And it was he went off to be a screenwriter, and that's the only movie he ended up making. And he finally just said, "Screw this shit. I'm going to go back to just being an author." And you know, but there was something about that movie that captured my attention. I was at a friend's wedding. It was I'd gone back to my room afterwards. I'm just flipping through channels, or maybe it was before the wedding when I was getting dressed. In any event, I was flipping through channels, and I stumbled across that movie. Partway through, it was the escalator scene, and the first escalator scene, and it's like, oh, I think this is that Millennium movie, which I never saw, and I got sucked in.
Yeah, that's funny because I don't see. I'll have to find where that movie is again because I do want to go back and watch it again.
Yeah, I watch it about once every 18 months.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, because I remember reading the book and then watching the movie, and the movie, it wasn't one of those, oh, well, the book is better. First of all, the book's always better, so don't even bother saying that. That's so redundant. I mean, what movie is better than the book? I'm sure there's something, but and so, but there was something like you said, it was something charming about that movie that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And it still has really important themes, and the whole thing about, you know, replacing people with dead bodies and all that, there's something about it that works. Chris Christopherson, who I love as an actor,
I do too.
I always liked God. There was so many. There's a, you know, there's Chris Christopherson always worked for me as an actor. I always thought he had a certain gravitas. And Cheryl Ladd at her, you know, right around her prime, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's
So to answer Bob's question, yes, but that's not why I like the movie.
God, I just saved on my phone a photo. Someone had posted a random photo of Farrah Fawcett. It looked like it was from an award show or something, and I had to save it. I was like, wow, you forget what an absolutely stunning woman she was.
Yeah,
absolutely stunning.
And everybody remembers the poster.
Oh yeah, of course.
Have you ever heard the story of the poster?
No.
They just like threw it together.
Oh, really?
The background was just a towel that they hung up, and they took
oh
a
my
picture.
I think I heard that.
I mean, it was like there was like no production value in that whatsoever. It was like one step above a Polaroid. They were going to do this little photo shoot, but it was a very low end photo shoot, etc. They did that picture and said, "Hey, this would make a good poster," and they sold
a gazillion,
500 billion copies.
I know that is the, when you think of, if I think of posters everyone had, that was it.
Yeah.
I don't know of another poster I can say that, oh, you know, Star Wars movie poster, but most girls didn't have that in their rooms, you know. So yeah, that was it. That's so funny. But yeah, and so Cheryl Ladd, yeah, even and Jacqueline Smith, God, and Kate Jackson, all those originals, Charlie's Angels, or you know, they were all gorgeous women, and it was, you know, it was a time in the 80s where it was, you know, the 80s are. I feel fortunate that I lived through the 80s, and at a time when I could appreciate it, because the 80s, I don't know what it was, but you know, and Crystal and I were having this conversation the other day, because every store you walk into plays 80s music. Every store. Yeah. You walk into Walmart, you walk into PetSmart, you name the store. If there's music playing, it's 80s music. It's sometimes 70s, late 70s, 80s, not disco, but 80s. It's just, name another decade that has music that has had such an impact on our culture, and so that's music. It's also the best decade ever for movies, right? You know,
so you could make the argument that in the 80s, if we were having this conversation, all the music would have been 60s music.
But yes, you could have.
The thing that I think is different about this is that there's a lot of the 80s music, you know, following just the 20-year rule. We should be in like the 1995 to 2005 music genre timeframe, and we're not. I mean, there's some, but I think it's the older stuff.
And I think, and a lot of that I also think is music fractured after the 80s into lots of. I mean, the rise of hip hop. You know, basically in the 80s you had, granted there was disco, but it wasn't that disco was mainstream. It was still.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway.
Well, and I think MTV was such a dominant force.
Yeah, of course.
You know, if you didn't live through it, you don't understand exactly how dominant a force MTV was. And because it really was, I mean, people would just wake up in the morning, turn on their television, and just leave it on MTV literally all day.
Yeah, that's so true. So that's
It was the soundtrack. It was the soundtrack of people's lives. So.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So I was going to say there was another movie that I put on the guilty pleasures list, and that is Wing Commander.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that.
There is so much wrong with that movie, but there's also a lot of stuff that's right with that movie. I mean, if I was going to remake a science fiction space combat movie, that's the one I would remake probably. And the reason why is if you think about the problems with that movie are all detail problems. Big picture, it holds together. Like this entire idea of they came in and the Kilrathi came in and stole the Navcom AI. The fleet is out of, they now know how to get to Earth. The fleet is out of position. I need you guys to intercept, get me some data, and hold them off for 24 hours. That's all I'm asking you to do so that I can get the fleet back into a blocking position and we can prevent the Earth from being slagged. And they went, yep, gonna do that. And then they go out and they stumble across and are able to capitalize on the one thing that turns it from maybe if we're lucky, we can prevent this from being a total disaster into, hey, you know what? Now we can make it a total disaster for them. And now the stuff that doesn't work is they've been on board the ship for 12 hours. And when the one pilot dies, the other guy's acting like, he'd known her his entire life. The entire bit about going vertical in space. There's all sorts of things that are just broken. But big picture wise, the story they're trying to tell, the pacing is actually, I think, pretty good in that movie too. That's another movie I go back and I watch about once a year.
Interesting. I have to go back and see. I haven't seen that in a while, but I can absolutely appreciate that. That's a guilty pleasure movie. Yeah, I have to go back and watch that. I got to find out where that is.
And you do have characters. Remember at the very end, as the Kilrathi ships are coming out one at a time, and David Warner's watching them come out one at a time and being destroyed by the defenders, his chief of staff walks up to him and says, "Sir, the ships are coming out one at a time and being destroyed by the defenders."
Yeah, because we needed that exposition.
Thanks. Got that one. David Warner was great in that role. The one thing that I think was actually problematic is there's the one guy who, oh, by the way, everybody, there's going to be spoilers. There was the one guy for the 20-year-old movie. There was the one guy who, the Turkish actor who was there as a spy. He was a naval intelligence guy. He was there as a civilian trader, but he actually had like a commission as like an admiral or a captain or something like that, secret orders, that sort of stuff. There's a time period at which he should have said, all right, check your computer. Here's the code. I'm actually in charge here. Or I'm actually a senior officer. I'm on your side. And instead he played this stupid game with, I've got David Warner's ring. Right. So, that ring has been in his family for X number of years. Anybody who's got it must have the Admiral's complete trust. When it's like, why play that game at a time period where, remember the entire bit about how the Kilrathis are going to show up at Earth in about 18 hours and kill everybody? Why are you playing the stupid game at that point? At that point, you say, no, secret orders. I'm going to read you into something that you're technically not cleared for. Put this code in the computer and it will confirm everything I'm telling you. They should have skipped right to that stage.
Yeah. Well,
but that's really in terms of like the structure of the plot, that's the only real problem I have with that.
There's Troy. Troy's wing commander might be suffered from adding something that had nothing to do with the original structure. The idea of the Pilgrims.
The Pilgrims was a little wonky. So I think, the Pilgrims might be the other thing that I think is, it's like they felt like they needed to have the Force, right?
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to have to wrap it up because I have to get going.
And, I do too. This is
it's 10 after 11. But want to thank everyone for coming out. I thank you for having me tonight, Chris. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you very much for stepping in. I really appreciate it. For everybody else, I've got a couple of things on my list of things to do. First of all, I want to go back and do the torpedo boats versus fighter things. I want to make a systematic effort to sort of try to get to figure out, to sort of characterize why fighters work in the real world, so that we can then compare that to science fiction, Star Trek in general, in specific, and science fiction in general, to see what attributes those fictional universes need to have in order for fighters to make sense in those universes. I thought about doing one on the background questions that you should be thinking about. There is a belief that there is no stealth in space. You frequently will hear people say that. I think it's way more complicated than that, because if you use the same arguments that the no stealth in space people use, there's also no stealth in atmosphere, and stealth airplanes don't work. But, operationally they do. And so I think the difference is between the scientific theory and the operations. I want to sort of do a little background stuff on all the operational things that you need to think about. Like, for instance, how many different sensors do you have to put out, and are you willing to spend the money to do that? And doing integrated defenses is hard. I want to take a look at the game Renegade Legion. For those of you who are Renegade Legion fans, you know that in the game Prefect, there was this thing that they called the operational briefing that had the single best explanation of space combat using their given set of assumptions. And I want to go through and talk about that a little bit. And so those are just a few of the things, plus the list of books that I've wanted to sort of go through and talk about, like Corbett, Some Principles of Maritime Strategy, etc. So all that stuff is on my list of things to do. One of the things that I've done recently that you all might be interested in is Winchell Chung's website, Atomic Rockets of the Space Patrol. We have moved it to a new ISP because his old ISP was going away. And so we successfully got it moved. Now, some of the other stuff on Project Row hasn't been moved yet. We realized partway through the process that there was a couple of bits and pieces that we needed to do separately. We've downloaded all the stuff. The ISP, I think, is gone at this point. We've downloaded all that stuff. We just haven't gone in and tweaked it. So if you're trying to get to some of the other stuff that was on Project Row, you may not be able to get to it yet. But Atomic Rockets has been moved. And the plan is that Winch is doing great right now, as I understand it. He's probably doing better than I am right now. But the plan is to make sure that website never goes away. And a lot of the stuff that happens on this show, in some ways, some important ways, happens because of the inspiration from Winch's website. And a lot of the stuff that you guys are seeing, you can sort of think of it as you're seeing the beta version of a bunch of stuff that I want to turn into something else that will be part of a companion to Winch's website. So you guys are all getting in on the ground floor on some things that as soon as I have enough iron in my system that I can actually have some stamina, I'm going to make happen. So.
Well, and that website, that's exciting. I mean, I'm real excited for you, and that keeping that going, that's a great legacy to keep going.
Yeah, especially, I mean, the two guys that wrote The Expanse are on record as saying they couldn't have written this series if it hadn't been for Atomic Rockets of the Space Patrol.
I just had, we're going to have to wrap this up, but I do want to say I just had an interesting conversation yesterday with someone who worked at Space Force. And we were talking about science fiction in the near future, not 300 years out, but what's happening, at the turn of the next century, 8 years from now, when it turns 2100, right? 2100. What is Mars going to look like? What's Earth, the moon going to look like? What are rockets going to look like? All that. We started having that conversation because I think there's an interesting story to be told 100 years in the future, not 300 years, and not light speed, and not, and just, when we're really still kind of dealing with our earthbound problems, U.S. versus China, whatever the public versus private, whatever those cases may be. But all right, listen, we will have that conversation another time.
Yes.
Please invite me back. I'm always here to sub in for you when Patrick
I
is
appreciate it.
letting you down because he's working 80 hours a week. You take care.
I am totally okay with Pat doing whatever he needs to do to prevent airplanes from falling out of the sky.
I
totally
agree.
Okay with that.
Keep going, Pat. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Chris, is always fantastic.
Thank you. See you later, everybody.
Take care.